The gunshot echoed across the red canyon walls like thunder trapped between stone and sky, and Eleanor Whitmore pressed her bloodied palm against the splintered wood of the abandoned mining shack, her wedding dress torn and stained with Arizona dust. 3 hours ago she had been standing in the mirror of the Garrett mansion, adjusting the pearl buttons of her ivory gown, believing she was about to marry a respectable merchant who would provide her with the security her late father had promised before consumption took him in Boston. Now she crouched behind rotting timber, listening to the approaching hoofbeats of men who wanted her dead simply because she had seen too much. The thunder rolled again across the desert, but this time it wasn't gunfire. The storm that had been building all evening finally broke open, sending fat raindrops through the gaps in the roof to mix with the tears streaming down Eleanor's dirt-streaked cheeks. She had discovered the truth about Thomas Garrett purely by accident, entering his study to retrieve a handkerchief she had forgotten after their final meeting before the wedding. The ledger lay open on his mahogany desk, and her educated eye, trained by years of helping her father with his accounting books, immediately recognized what she was seeing. Column after column of transactions, each one representing Apache land sold to railroad companies, each one marked with dates that corresponded to newspaper reports of entire families found slaughtered in their camps. Thomas Garrett wasn't just a merchant. He was orchestrating the systematic murder of Apache families to steal their ancestral territories, selling the blood-soaked earth to the highest bidder while the territorial government looked the other way. Eleanor's hands had trembled as she turned the pages, finding her own name listed among the assets, marked with a price that made her stomach lurch. She wasn't a bride to Thomas Garrett. She was inventory. The sound of spurs on rock cut through the rain, and Eleanor held her breath as shadows moved past the broken windows of the mining shack. She had managed to escape the Garrett estate by climbing through her bedroom window and taking one of the horses from the stable, but her pursuer had caught up to her within miles. The wedding dress that should have been her symbol of new beginnings had become a beacon in the moonlight, making her an easy target for the men Thomas had sent to bring her back. Or silence her permanently. Lightning illuminated the interior of the shack, revealing the skeletal remains of mining equipment left behind when the silver veins played out years ago. In that brief moment of brightness, Eleanor saw she wasn't alone. A figure sat in the far corner, perfectly still, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. She opened her mouth to scream, but a leather-gloved hand gestured for silence, and she found herself obeying the unspoken command. The man wore a long black coat despite the desert heat, and twin Colt revolvers hung at his sides like the scales of some dark justice. His face remained hidden in shadow, but Eleanor could feel his eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of graves and the whisper of wind through dead leaves. "They're looking for a bride in white. Take off the dress." Eleanor recoiled, pressing herself against the wall. "I most certainly will not. Who are you? What are you doing here?" The gunslinger tilted his head slightly, and another flash of lightning revealed angular features carved by years of desert sun and violence. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, giving his face a perpetually menacing expression. "Name's Jake Sullivan. Some call me Crow because I'm usually the last thing men see before they meet their maker. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave in the desert." The hoofbeats circled the shack now, and Eleanor could hear voices calling through the rain. "She went this way, boss. Trail ends right here." Another voice, rougher and slurred with whiskey, added, "Maybe she's hiding inside. Want us to smoke her out?" Jake Sullivan rose from his position with fluid grace, his hands resting on the grips of his pistols. "That dress makes you a target. Either take it off, or I leave you to explain to Thomas Garrett's men why you're running on your wedding night." Eleanor's mind raced through her limited options. The wedding dress was indeed conspicuous, but she wore only a thin chemise beneath it. The thought of standing nearly naked before this dangerous stranger filled her with horror, but the alternative was far worse. With shaking fingers, she began unfastening the pearl buttons, her face burning with shame and terror. "Turn around," she whispered. Jake Sullivan's laugh was like the sound of bones rattling in a desert wind. "Lady, I've seen more blood and death than you've seen Sunday sermons. Your modesty isn't going to shock me into an early grave." But he turned away nonetheless, facing the door where the voices grew closer. Eleanor struggled out of the elaborate gown, her movements hampered by fear and the complex array of buttons and stays. The wedding dress fell to the floor in a pool of ivory silk and shattered dreams. She grabbed a moth-eaten blanket from a nearby crate and wrapped it around herself, the rough wool scratching against her skin. "Now listen carefully," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Those men out there aren't just going to ask you politely to come home. Thomas Garrett has a reputation to maintain, and you've seen enough to hang him from the highest cottonwood in the territory. They'll kill you, make it look like an accident, and tell everyone the poor bride got lost in the storm and succumbed to the elements." The door creaked, and Eleanor saw the outline of a man's shoulder as someone pressed against the frame. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain it could be heard over the rain. "There's definitely someone in here," came the whispered report. "I can smell perfume." Jake's hands moved to his guns with practiced ease. "When the shooting starts, get behind that overturned cart and stay down. Don't move, don't breathe loud, and don't try to run. The desert will kill you slower than a bullet, but just as dead." "Wait," Eleanor grabbed his arm, feeling the corded muscle beneath the black fabric. "I don't understand any of this. Why are you here? Why are you helping me? What do you know about Thomas Garrett?" Jake Sullivan turned to face her fully for the first time, and Eleanor saw eyes the color of winter ice, filled with a pain so deep it seemed to swallow light. "Thomas Garrett killed my wife and daughter 3 years ago. Burned them alive in their cabin while I was away hunting bounties. Told everyone it was Apache raiders, but I know better. I've been tracking him ever since, waiting for the right moment to make him pay." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "Your family, they were." Sarah was part Apache, inherited land from her grandmother's people. Rich land, with water rights that Garrett wanted for his railroad friends. When she wouldn't sell, he took what he wanted anyway. Jake's voice remained steady, but Eleanor could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. "My little girl, Maria, she was only 7 years old. She liked to pick wildflowers and make crowns out of them. Garrett's men doused the cabin with coal oil while she slept." Thunder crashed overhead, and with it came the sound Eleanor had been dreading. The door burst open, and 3 men pushed inside, their revolvers drawn and their faces hidden behind bandanas. The leader, a tall man with cruel eyes, scanned the interior of the shack with predatory intensity. Well, what do we have here?" His gaze fell on Eleanor, crouched behind Jake Sullivan with the blanket clutched around her. "Mrs. Eleanor Garrett, I presume. Though I suppose we should say Miss Whitmore, since the wedding never quite took place." Jake Sullivan stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and the intruders. His hands hung loose at his sides, deceptively casual, but Eleanor could sense the deadly tension coiled in his frame like a spring waiting to be released. "Gentlemen," Jake said, his voice carrying a dangerous calm that made the rain seem loud by comparison. "I believe the lady has made it clear she's not interested in your employer's hospitality." The leader laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "And I believe you're interfering in private business that doesn't concern you, stranger. Mr. Garrett has invested considerable money in this young woman's future. She's got obligations to fulfill." "The only obligation she has," Jake replied, "is to stay alive long enough to see justice done." Eleanor found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I saw the ledgers, Mr. Morrison." She addressed the leader by name, recognizing him now as Thomas Garrett's foreman. "I know about the Apache families. I know about the land sales. I know what you've been doing." Morrison's expression darkened. "What you think you know, little lady, is going to die with you in this storm. Along with your friend here, whoever he might be." Jake Sullivan smiled then, and Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain seeping through the roof. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. "The name's Jake Sullivan," he said, his voice carrying across the shack like a death sentence. "But most folks who've heard of me call me Crow. I believe your boss might have mentioned that name once or twice." The effect on Morrison and his men was immediate and profound. The foreman's face went white, and Eleanor heard one of the other men whisper something that sounded like a prayer. Morrison's gun hand, which had been steady before, began to tremble slightly. "You're supposed to be dead," Morrison breathed. "Garrett said you died in Mexico, hunting some bandito." "Garrett says a lot of things. Most of them lies." Jake's hands moved closer to his guns, and Eleanor could see the other men shifting nervously, torn between their fear of disappointing their boss and their terror of the legendary gunfighter standing before them. "Now, you boys have two choices. You can walk out that door, ride back to town, and tell Thomas Garrett that his wedding is permanently cancelled. Or you can draw those guns you're so fond of waving around and see if you're fast enough to survive the next 10 seconds. The silence that followed was broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. Eleanor held her breath, knowing that whatever happened in the next few moments would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise or joined the countless other victims of Thomas Garrett's greed. Morrison licked his lips, his eyes darting between Jake's face and the guns at his sides. "You can't protect her forever, Sullivan. Garrett's got men all over this territory. Even if you kill us, more will come." "Then I guess," Jake said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I'll just have to kill them too." The gunfight lasted exactly 17 seconds, but to Eleanor it felt like watching eternity unfold in slow motion. Morrison drew first, his Colt clearing leather with desperate speed, but Jake Sullivan moved like liquid death, both revolvers appearing in his hands as if materialized by some dark magic. The muzzle flashes lit up the interior of the mining shack like hellfire, and when the thunder of gunshots finally ceased, 3 bodies lay sprawled on the wooden floor in growing pools of blood. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, her ears ringing from the concussion of gunfire in the enclosed space. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood and the petrichor of desert rain. Jake stood among the carnage, smoke curling from the barrels of his Colts, his face as calm as if he had just finished reading the morning newspaper. "We need to move," he said, holstering his weapons with fluid precision. "The shots will carry, even in this storm. More men will come, and this shack won't provide cover against a larger force." Eleanor stared at the bodies, bile rising in her throat. She had never seen death this close, this violent. Morrison's eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his mouth frozen in a permanent expression of surprise. "You killed them all," she whispered. "They made their choice when they decided to serve a man who burns families alive in their sleep." Jake moved to the window, peering through the rain toward the desert beyond. "Thomas Garrett has been building his empire on blood and stolen land for years. Tonight, that empire starts crumbling." Eleanor found herself moving toward the door despite her terror, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't understand. The storm was beginning to pass, and through the broken clouds she could see the lights of Red Canyon in the distance, warm and inviting like the promise of civilization. But she knew now that civilization was often just a mask worn by monsters. "What happens now?" she asked, pulling the moth-eaten blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Even if we escape, where can we go? Thomas has connections throughout the territory. Judges, sheriffs, territorial officials. They're all in his pocket." Jake Sullivan turned from the window, and in the dim light Eleanor saw something she hadn't noticed before. Pinned to the inside of his black coat was a silver star, tarnished with age but unmistakable in its authority. "Thomas Garrett made one crucial mistake," he said, his voice carrying the weight of long-delayed justice. 3 years ago, when he killed my family, he didn't just murder a bounty hunter's wife and child. He killed the family of a United States Marshal." The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "You're a federal lawman." "Was. Am again, as of last week." Territorial governor finally got tired of Garrett's activities drawing unwanted attention from Washington. "Turns out the president doesn't appreciate private citizens conducting unauthorized wars against Apache tribes, especially when it interferes with official treaty negotiations." Jake's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "I've been officially reinstated with full federal authority to investigate and arrest anyone involved in the illegal seizure of tribal lands." Eleanor felt hope blooming in her chest for the first time since discovering Thomas's ledger. "Then we can expose him. We can bring him to trial. We can do better than that." Jake moved to Morrison's body and began searching through his pockets, retrieving a folded document sealed with red wax. We can catch him in the act. Morrison here was carrying orders for tomorrow night. Garrett's planning to hit the last Apache family holding out in the canyon country, the ones with the water rights he needs for his railroad deal. Chief Running Bear's people have been refusing to sell, so Garrett's decided to remove them permanently. The paper crackled as Jake unfolded it, revealing detailed maps and precise instructions written in Thomas Garrett's own hand. Eleanor read over his shoulder, her horror growing with each line. The plan was methodical, brutal, and comprehensive. Every member of Running Bear's family was to be eliminated, their bodies arranged to look like the victims of a rival tribal conflict. The land would then be seized under territorial emergency powers and quickly sold to Garrett's railroad associates before anyone could investigate too closely. This is evidence, Eleanor breathed. Proof of premeditated murder. A federal judge would have to act. A federal judge will act, Jake corrected, folding the document and tucking it into his coat. But first, we're going to make sure there are no more victims. Running Bear's family doesn't know what's coming. They trust in the old treaties, the old ways of honor. They can't imagine men like Thomas Garrett exist. Lightning flashed again, closer now, and Eleanor saw her reflection in the broken window glass. The frightened Boston socialite was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who had seen the true face of evil and chosen to stand against it. What do you need me to do? Jake Sullivan studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor sensed him making some internal calculation. There's a telegraph office in Red Canyon. If you can reach it, send a message to Federal Judge Harrison in Tucson. Tell him Marshal Sullivan requests immediate assistance and federal marshals for a mass arrest operation. Use these words exactly. He recited a coded message that Eleanor committed to memory. What about you? I'm writing to Running Bear's camp to warn them and prepare a reception for Garrett's men. If everything goes according to plan, we'll catch them in the act with federal witnesses present. Thomas Garrett and his entire organization will hang before Christmas. Eleanor nodded, understanding the desperate nature of their plan but knowing they had no alternative. Jake, she said as he prepared to leave, what you said about your wife and daughter. I'm sorry. No one should have to endure that kind of loss. For just a moment, the hardness left Jake Sullivan's face, and Eleanor glimpsed the grieving husband and father beneath the legendary gunfighter. Sarah used to make wildflower crowns, just like Maria. She'd wear them while she cooked dinner, singing old Apache songs her grandmother taught her. Thomas Garrett didn't just kill them. He tried to erase them, make it seem like they never mattered. They mattered, Eleanor said quietly. And after tomorrow night, everyone will know their names and remember their story. Jake nodded, pulling his hat low over his eyes. Stay alive, Eleanor Whitmore. The territory needs people like you, people willing to stand up to men like Garrett. Don't let him turn you into another victim. He disappeared into the storm, leaving Eleanor alone with the bodies and the weight of what lay ahead. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself and began her journey toward Red Canyon, knowing that by tomorrow night, the desert would either witness the end of Thomas Garrett's reign of terror or claim 2 more victims in its endless expanse of sand and stone. Behind her, thunder rolled across the mountains like the sound of approaching justice, and Eleanor Whitmore walked into the darkness to meet whatever destiny awaited.